The year is 1867. A new kind of empire is being forged in the heart of Europe. It's a story of survival, of compromise, a story born from defeat. The Austrian Empire, led by the ancient House of Habsburg, had just suffered a humiliating loss to Prussia. Its power in Germany was broken. Its influence was waning. Emperor Franz Joseph, a man who had seen his world shaken, knew something had to change. A pact with the second most powerful group in his lands, the Hungarians. This pact was called the Ausgleich, the compromise. It was a deal struck between Vienna and Budapest, a political marriage of convenience, and from it, a new entity was born, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the dual monarchy. It was a strange and complex creation. Two separate kingdoms, Austria and Hungary, each with its own parliament, its own government, its own prime minister. To understand Austria-Hungary, you have to look beyond its rulers, beyond its politics. You have to look at its people. And what a collection of people it was. This wasn't a nation-state like France or Britain. It was a multinational empire. At its head were the Germans, the Austrians. They dominated the government, the bureaucracy, the army. And alongside them, as partners in power, were the Magyars, the Hungarians. Fiercely proud of their unique language and culture, they ruled the eastern half of the empire with an iron will. In the north, there were the Czechs in Bohemia and Moravia, an industrial and highly educated people. There were the Poles in Galicia, dreaming of a restored Poland. To the south, you had another world of Slavic peoples, the Croats, the Serbs, the Slovenes. In the east, in the vast lands of Transylvania and Bukovina, lived the Romanians. Scattered throughout the empire were thriving Jewish communities. They were doctors, lawyers, artists, and journalists. German, Hungarian, Czech, Polish, Croatian, Serbian, Romanian, Italian, Yiddish. The list goes on. At the very heart of this vast, complex empire stood one man, a figure of immense authority and tradition, Emperor Franz Joseph I. His reign was one of the longest in modern history. He came to the throne in the revolutionary year of 1848, a young man of 18. His personal life was marked by terrible tragedy. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, died in a suicide pact at Meierling. His beloved wife, Empress Elizabeth, the beautiful and restless Sisi, was assassinated by an anarchist in Geneva. These losses weighed heavily on him. They turned him into a remote, solitary figure. He became a man of duty, of routine. He would rise before dawn, working tirelessly at his desk. His personal motto was Viribus Unitis, with united forces. A plea for the unity he desperately tried to maintain. He tried to be a fair ruler to all his peoples. He would grant audiences to ordinary subjects from every corner of his realm. As he grew older, his image became iconic. He was everywhere. On coins, on stamps, on portraits in every school and post office. A Czech farmer and a Hungarian nobleman might have nothing in common, but they both shared a grudging respect to the old man in Vienna. His long reign delayed the inevitable crisis, but it couldn't prevent it. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of dazzling change for Austria-Hungary. The empire was industrializing at a rapid pace. Factories sprang up in Bohemia and around Vienna. The railway network expanded, stitching the vast territories together. Great cities like Vienna, Budapest, and Prague became world-class centers of culture and learning. They were vibrant, exciting places, buzzing with new ideas. This was the Vienna of Sigmund Freud, Gustav Klimt, and Gustav Mahler, a golden age of science, art, and music. For the elites in the cities, life had never been better. They enjoyed cafes, concert halls, and lively political debate. Away from the grand cities, much of the empire remained deeply rural, poor, and agricultural. In Galicia, in Bosnia, in parts of Hungary, peasants lived in conditions that had barely changed for centuries. Vienna had a parliament elected by universal male suffrage, a very progressive step for its time. The Hungarians fiercely guarded their own parliament but denied basic political rights to the Slovaks, Romanians, and Croats. It was this mix of dazzling brilliance and deep-seated problems that made Austria-Hungary such a volatile place. If there was one force that defined the final decades of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was nationalism. It was the belief that people who share a common language, culture, and history should have their own nation. This idea was like a powerful acid, slowly but surely dissolving the bonds that held the multinational empire together. The Czechs in Bohemia and Moravia were among the first. They had a glorious history of their own kingdom. They demanded greater autonomy, their own parliament, the use of the Czech language in schools and government offices. This movement, led by thinkers and politicians like Thomas Masaryk, grew stronger and more confident. The problem was even more intense in the south. Here, the South Slavs were becoming increasingly restless. The Serbs inside the empire looked across the border to the independent kingdom of Serbia. Serbia saw itself as the champion of all South Slavs. It actively encouraged nationalist feelings among Habsburg Slavs. This rising tide of nationalism was an impossible problem for the rulers in Vienna. How could they satisfy everyone? The empire was becoming a prison of nations, and its inmates were rattling the bars, desperate to get out. People began to see themselves not as Habsburg subjects, but as Czechs, Poles, Croats, or Serbs first. The Balkans, that rugged mountainous peninsula in the southeast of Europe. By the early 20th century, it was known as the powder keg of Europe. The empire's interests clashed directly with the ambitions of the small but aggressive Kingdom of Serbia. The trouble really began in 1908. Austro-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. This act caused outrage in Serbia. The annexation was a slap in the face. It felt like a theft. Secret societies were formed. Groups like the Black Hand were willing to use terrorism and assassination. The situation was made more dangerous by military alliances that had divided Europe into two armed camps. The generals and politicians knew this. They drew up war plans. The armies grew larger. The weapons became more deadly. All that was needed was a spark, a single dramatic event to set the whole thing off. That spark would come on a sunny June day in the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo. The spark came on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo. He was a complex figure, not well liked by many in the Viennese court, but he had ideas for reforming the empire. A young Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped out of the crowd and fired his pistol. Both the Archduke and his wife Sophie were killed. The assassination sent shockwaves across Europe. In Vienna, the government saw its chance. The war party urged immediate military action. They secured a promise of unconditional support from Germany. This was the infamous blank check. They issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia, demands so severe they knew Serbia could never accept them all. When Serbia rejected part of the ultimatum, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. The alliance system snapped into place. Russia mobilized. Germany declared war on Russia and France. Britain entered to defend Belgium. Within a week, a local conflict in the Balkans had exploded into a general European war. The war was a disaster for the empire from the beginning. The army was not prepared for a conflict of this scale. The initial invasion of Serbia was a humiliating failure. The Serbs fought back fiercely and threw the invaders out. The dream of a short, glorious war died in the mud and snow of the Carpathians and the trenches of the Isonzo River. As the Great War dragged on, it became a brutal test of survival. The war wasn't just being fought on the battlefields, it was being fought at home, on the farms, in the factories, and in the hearts and minds of its diverse peoples. The economic cost was ruinous. The British blockade cut off supplies, food shortages became critical. In the cities, people were starving, malnutrition and disease spread. The government printed more money, leading to runaway inflation. People's life savings became worthless. This economic collapse destroyed public morale. The bond of trust between the people and the state was broken. Thousands of civilians were accused of being enemy sympathizers and interned in brutal camps. This persecution turned many against the state. Abroad, exiled nationalist leaders like Thomas Masaryk worked tirelessly to persuade the Allied powers to support the empire's breakup. They lobbied Britain, France, and America to support the creation of new independent nations. In November 1916, the old emperor Franz Joseph died. He had reigned for 68 years. The one symbol of unity was gone. He was succeeded by his grandnephew, Emperor Charles I. Charles was well-meaning and wanted peace. The empire was a sinking ship. The different peoples were no longer looking for a better cabin. They were looking for the lifeboats. The year 1918 was the year the Austro-Hungarian Empire finally broke. The end came swiftly, like a great dam bursting. On the Italian front, the army completely collapsed in the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. Soldiers simply dropped their weapons and started walking home. The military collapse triggered a political implosion. All across the empire, nationalist movements seized their moment. It was like a chain reaction. On October 28th in Prague, Czech leaders declared the independence of Czechoslovakia. 2 days later, in Zagreb, the Croats and Serbs declared their intention to join Yugoslavia. In Budapest, a revolution broke out, and Hungary declared itself an independent republic, formally ending the dual monarchy. In Vienna, the last emperor, Charles I, was powerless to stop the disintegration. He faced reality. On November 11, 1918, he issued a proclamation recognizing the right of the Austrian people to determine their own government. The next day, the Republic of German Austria was proclaimed. After more than 600 years, the rule of the House of Habsburg had ended. From the ruins of Austria-Hungary, a collection of new countries emerged: Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Large territories were given to Poland, Romania, and Italy. A whole new world was born. This was the world that President Woodrow Wilson had called for, based on national self-determination. The story of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was over. A grand 50-year experiment in holding diverse nations together had ended in failure, war, and collapse.